Hello, I'm Nathan P. Butler, author of A Saga on Home Video and host of From the Star Wars Home Video Library here on YouTube, and this is Star Wars Home Video Year by Year. This time we take a look at 1986. Now, 1986 is a huge year for Star Wars on Home Video. We are going to dive into it in just a moment, but now that we are rounding out the first decade of releases, starting in 1977 and going now through 1986, I did want to take a brief moment, especially since we're about to hit the holiday season, to very quickly make a suggestion of my own benefit, and that is to very quickly point out what is available for my Saga on Home Video 2nd edition for those who might be looking at the possibility of maybe having some Amazon gift cards to burn over the holidays here, or perhaps are just into Star Wars Home Video stuff and want to read more about it. So again, very quickly, we have Volume 1. These are all available on Amazon. We have Volume 1. This is the one that the stuff so far with the live action films would be found in. This is all the live action films 1 through 6, all the way up through 2015 releases here. So this is mostly what this stuff is covering. Volume 3, if we can jump over to for just a second, is basically everything other than the live action films. So this is going to be the behind the scenes stuff, Ewoks, droids, Clone Wars, and all that kind of stuff. So the other stuff we've covered so far will be in here if you're looking for it in narrative history form. Then there is one in the middle, that is Volume 2. This picks up with live action film releases for all 11 films from 2016 onward to publication late in 2021. Okay, they're available out there in 3 different formats through Amazon. There is this sort of premium hardback version. It's all full color pictures throughout, glossy paper and everything. As sort of the deluxe version, there is sort of a standard paperback version, also full color. That one has regular paper, so not as glossy images on the inside, but still a solid choice. And if you want a version that has very clear pictures you can kind of zoom in on and everything, and that is also the most cost effective, they're also available as print replica Kindle copies, basically the way that a magazine and something like that would work, where it won't work on an e-ink device, but it would work on any other Kindle device or the Kindle app. So if you're interested, they're all available over there on Amazon. I'm going to do my best not to plug this often, but I figured, I talked about it in the first episode, we're ending a decade here, we're heading towards the holidays in the time span that I'm releasing this, so people keep telling me I should promote it more. Okay, I've addressed it, and we can move on. They're available if you want them. I'll even put a timestamp so those who don't care could skip over this part of the video. I would also note for those following new stuff, the parent series of this show from the Star Wars Home Video Library did just take a look at Ahsoka Season 1 and Mandalorian Season 3, which have some changes to what we expect from Star Wars Home Video here in the latter part of 2024. But that's the future compared to this episode, right? Let's take a look at 1986 because it was a huge year for Star Wars physical media. As for context here, 2 things, probably the most noteworthy being Star Wars comics and Star Wars cartoons. In Star Wars comics, this was the year that the original Marvel series ended. It ran for 107 issues, plus 3 annuals, plus the 4-issue Return of the Jedi miniseries. The other 2 films have been adapted within the regular run of 107 itself. That series ended in 1987. However, Marvel had kind of a kiddie imprint of Star Comics, and this is the year that they launched the Droids and Ewoks comics. So Marvel is still going at this point, but not its main, more adult fare series, which had included stories set after Return of the Jedi leading up to the end of that series. Also, speaking of Droids and Ewoks, those shows are changing on the home market here. In 1986, we don't see a new season of Droids. Instead, we see a TV special called The Great Heap, and then that's it for Droids. As for Ewoks, Ewoks gets completely retooled for a younger demographic, a different demographic, to give us Ewoks Season 2, the all-new Ewoks, which is god-awful. I've talked about it before, I don't want to belabor the point, but oh my god, Season 2 is garbage. And many of the characters change without any explanation into really horrible new versions of themselves. You have to see it to believe it, but seeing it is painful if you even remotely enjoyed the first season, so check it out at your own risk. It is all up on Disney Plus at this point. The biggest thing, of course, was that this was the year that Return of the Jedi finally hit home video. So you can actually watch the entire trilogy at home. No trilogy set at home quite yet, but you could watch them all at home. It took 5 years for A New Hope to hit home video, 77 to 82, 4 years for Empire, 80 to 84, now 3 years for Return of the Jedi, 83 to 86. And of course, it was released on the formats of the time here in the US. We have a VHS version here. We also have a Beta version, again, in what is basically VHS packaging, does have the Beta sticker on it and does have that slightly different insides to hold the cassette without it flopping around while you're moving the case around here. Notice that the hi-fi stereo sticker has been moved up to the corner rather than in the bottom corner down here like we had seen with A New Hope and The Empire Strikes Back in recent years. And again, this is one where, depending on when you get it, between 1986 and about 1989, you might have a trailer before the film with a 10th anniversary kind of animation right in front of it. You might have a trailer for the trilogy that comes after the film with a black screen introduction, that sort of thing. There are variations of this over those years, but 1986 is when this version does kick off. It was also, of course, released on LaserDisc, and this is a big deal because there are 2 discs inside. Yes, they finally did away with time compression, and this is a non-time compressed version of Return of the Jedi, full screen still, across 2 different discs, CLV extended play discs. Similarly, we didn't see any time compression methods used for CED this year either. But wait, CED's in those big old plastic caddy things. Surely this isn't like a VHD approach out of Japan where one film has 2 giant floppy disk looking things, right? No, that's exactly what happened. In fact, it's even more so than that. So we have part 1 on one CED here for Return of the Jedi, and then we have part 2 on a second one. So for the entire film, you need both, taking up quite a bit of space. And remember, the blue on a CED case typically means it is in stereo. But at the latter part of the CED life cycle, we saw mismatches and reused packaging and whatnot, so that distinction of blue for stereo, white for mono pretty much went out the window, and they were just using whatever caddies they had, as evidenced by a second CED set for Return of the Jedi in 86 in white caddies instead. The product inside is the same, the caddies are the different colors. So yes, there is a variant here. You can pick up Return of the Jedi in white or blue caddies. Empire was really the only one of the original trilogy films on CED that never had any variations to it. These, by the way, were the last of the Star Wars CEDs in the United States. And before we leave Return of the Jedi, I should note that while there's plenty of other Return of the Jedi releases we could look at in various other regions, one that stands out is one that we have looked at format-wise in the past, and that is VHD out of Japan, because there was a change this time. This is the Return of the Jedi VHD out of Japan. The big difference being that even though it is still not time compressed, it is still in 2 different cases here for your 2 discs, it is just the one slipcover now. So they're actually packaged together, unlike what we saw with those other VHDs, and of course the way that those caddies are for Return of the Jedi in the US for CED. So a little bit of a more compact, user-friendly design to the VHD for Jedi. Another big thing in 1986 is something that we sort of presaged back in the previous episode. Remember, in 1985, Ben Burtt had stepped in and did a remaster of the audio for A New Hope, but it wouldn't see home video until 1986. Well, that is finally here, because now we're looking at 86. Remember, back in 1984, we had these releases on VHS and Beta of A New Hope, and the key thing to note there was that it had the red triangle that said Hi-Fi Stereo, and it said Hi-Fi Stereo on the side, but not digitally mastered. So this was essentially the same version of the film that we had seen on home video since 82, where it is missing C-3PO's line, but it does have the subtitle on it like it did the last time it was in theaters up to that point. Or at least up to the point of that release in 82. Well, in 86, that new audio mix arrives on home video with C-3PO's line restored in Beta and VHS forms here. Now again, these look very, very, very similar to what we just saw here. So the key thing to note, if you're looking at one from 86 through about 88, 89, is that on the spine, it says digitally mastered underneath Hi-Fi Stereo, and in the triangle on the front, it says digitally mastered underneath hi-fi stereo. If it doesn't say digitally mastered, it's 1984. If it is digitally mastered, we're looking at 86 to 89, and which version it is going to depend on whether it has a trailer on it. Is the trailer at the beginning? Is a trailer at the end? Is there a little holographic dot on the back kind of stuff? But all of them will still have that same frustrating packaging copyright date of 1984, sometimes causing people to list ones from 86 to 89 as if they are 84 copies on places like eBay. Or when grading. Know what you're grading! The US also had another key, but also low-key, release this year, which was Playhouse Video putting out the first home video version in the US of From Star Wars to Jedi, The Making of a Saga, rounding out those 4 behind-the-scenes specials, right? We've seen a lot of Making of Star Wars and SPFX The Empire Strikes Back, usually together. Then we had Classic Creatures Return of the Jedi from Playhouse Video. Now we have From Star Wars to Jedi, The Making of a Saga on home video, which will have more permutations down the line. Speaking of behind-the-scenes specials, we should note that over in Japan, we saw an initial LaserDisc release of Classic Creatures Return of the Jedi. They had just done From Star Wars to Jedi, The Making of a Saga. Now they've got Classic Creatures Return of the Jedi to go with it. And while we're talking Japan and LaserDiscs, this is also when they got Caravan of Courage, an Ewok Adventure, or The Ewok Adventure, or whatever you want to call it, that it had a theatrical release over there, I believe, actually released on LaserDisc. We still didn't see any releases of this in the United States. We wouldn't until 1990. And it wouldn't be under CBS Fox Video making these oddities in other regions, or us the oddity, probably more so us being the oddity in the United States. Remember, CBS Fox Video is also how we saw Caravan of Courage released in the UK previously. And of course, no discussion of 1986 and Star Wars on home video would be complete without the third major item. First was Return of the Jedi. Second was A New Hope getting the new audio mix and the confusion that that sometimes causes. The other is happening in Japan on LaserDisc, and that is the release of the first item in the so-called Japanese Special Collection. The Obi is on here. I'm going to take that off so you can see where it says Special Collection up there at the top. This is a groundbreaking moment in Star Wars home video worldwide, because this is the first time a Star Wars theatrical film, from the original trilogy in this case, but those are the only ones around at the time, is being released in widescreen for home viewing. You had selected scenes on Super 8 if you had a special lens in just one release in the US and one overseas, but here we see an actual home media release on a popular format that has the entire film fully in widescreen. So now's the time to very briefly take a look at what this means. So, in the 70s into 80s and so on, basically from the advent of TV up until widescreen TVs started to become more of the norm, what we saw was sort of standard definition television and standard aspect ratio television, which are two different things. Standard definition has to do with like the number of lines and stuff like that, okay? That is much more in terms of how clear the picture is. But aspect ratio is essentially width and height as a ratio to see how big the picture actually is on your screen, regardless of how clear it might be. So a standard television back in the day, like a CRT television, for example, would be 4:3, much more square than a widescreen image. Still not square, but much more square than a typical widescreen television would be. Another way of putting that instead of 4:3 is to say 1.33:1 if you see it written that way. Whereas films in theaters tended to be widescreen presentations, much wider than they were tall, with aspect ratios of 2.35 or 2.39 to 1, which indicates a much longer or wider image than it was tall. So there were two ways that you could take a movie that was presented in widescreen in theaters and put it on home media. The most common way up to that point had been pan and scan, which I think we talked about before, and these days we refer to as full screen most of the time, that fills the full 4:3 image on a standard television of that era. And to do that, they're basically doing shots as the film is going, either individual shots for individual frames or panning around at the time, such that as they're capturing the images, the camera, so to speak, your view shifts or jumps to different parts of the wide image to get the narrower image that's only about 2/3 as wide to fit your television. You will miss things on the periphery. Anytime you are watching something in full screen, you are missing about 1/3 of the picture anytime you're looking at the screen. Often it doesn't matter. Sometimes it's a huge difference, and it certainly cuts down for a TV viewing feeling versus a theatrical feeling. The other option for putting a widescreen film on home media would be to do at the time what's called letterboxing. It's still going to be a 4:3 image. So how do you make it fit? Well, if Pan and Scan was basically saying we're going to take this image, this wide image, and we're going to make it so that top and bottom touch the top and bottom of your screen, but that means we got to cut out about 1/3 of the picture to make it work, 1/3 of the width of the picture to make that work. This is kind of the opposite. We're not going to line up with the top and bottom of the screen. We're going to line up with the left and right of the screen. What does that mean, though? You got a bunch of dead space at the top and bottom because the picture is narrower height-wise than your screen. So we're going to fill that extra space with black bars, basically. So it's still a 4:3 image, but you have a widescreen image in the middle with black bars on top and bottom. It does mean on your TV screen, full screen compared to widescreen, you're seeing more, but you're seeing it smaller, which led some people to actually believe at the time that widescreen was somehow inferior to full screen because it wasn't as big. Dude, you're finally getting to see the whole damn picture. What is your problem, 1980s complainers? I know I'm a little bit late on griping about those 1980s complainers, but it still deserves scorn to this day, I'll be honest. In any event, though, that letterboxed approach is what was taken for these Japanese releases for the Special Collection, starting with A New Hope in 1986. You'll notice here a few things. First off, aside from it just being kind of fancy schmancy here, if you look at the back, big indicator here, it is CAV. Remember, there's extended play CLV, about an hour on each side. So an untime compressed film for Star Wars needs 2 discs. This is CAV. It is generally a better quality, and it's got more features if you have like a player that can do like freeze frames and stuff like that. But at the same time, it also means only about half an hour per side, so you need a lot more discs. So yes, this is a massive 3-disc set, but kind of fancy looking here from Japan. It's also got a little insert inside it here. Okay, so we're getting a widescreen version for the first time, and we are getting it on CAV disc, which is not the first time for A New Hope, right? We saw CAV a while back with that standard play pair for A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back that we saw before in the US. But CAV and widescreen made this the best possible presentation as of 1986. Now, it is Japanese, so there are Japanese subtitles burned into the image, so to speak, underneath in that bottom black area, but that is a small price to pay to be able to actually see the film at home in widescreen. So this was something you would have to import back at the time. There will be a US version of this coming, but it won't be quite as fancy as this version from Japan. A lot of collectors still look at the Japanese Special Collection discs, the Japanese Special Collection releases for the original trilogy as one of the moments, if not the moment, that is sort of a gold standard of LaserDisc releases for the Star Wars films. And it begins here in 1986 around the world, while the US is entirely focused pretty much on Return of the Jedi and even just barely noticing the new release of A New Hope. But widescreen will come to the US. It's just a little ways away still. We'll continue forward into the gap between the Japanese widescreen releases and the first in the US as we head into our next episode when we take a look at 1987.